Have you ever watched a CEO lose his entire board seat in his own boardroom to the daughter he called useless? That's exactly what happened to my father when he tried to remove me as a shareholder. For 15 years, I was the frigid, incompetent daughter who quietly funded their champagne lifestyle from the shadows. The breaking point came when my stepmother had security physically escort me out of his $2 million retirement party at the Ritz-Carlton, Manhattan. What they didn't know was that I controlled 31% of their company through shell corporations, and their public humiliation had just triggered Clause 7.3.2, the respect provision I'd been waiting years to invoke. Hello, everyone. I'm Rebecca Davidson, 38 years old, and this is the story of how I went from being thrown out of my father's celebration to taking his chairman position in exactly 72 hours. If you're watching this, please subscribe and let me know where you are watching from. Looking back, the signs were always there. Despite graduating from Wharton with an MBA and building a 15-year track record in high finance, I remained the family disappointment. My father, Robert Davidson, CEO of Davidson Holdings, a real estate empire worth $2.3 billion, had a favorite phrase he'd repeat at every family gathering. Rebecca may have fancy degrees, but Derek here, he understands people. Derek, my stepmother Victoria's son, had dropped out of college after 3 semesters. At 26, his greatest achievement was crashing 2 Ferraris and getting banned from 3 country clubs. Yet somehow, in my father's eyes, he possessed that intangible quality I apparently lacked, the ability to connect. I remember the Thanksgiving when my aunt asked about my work. Before I could answer, my father cut in. Rebecca works with numbers all day. No vision, no leadership, just spreadsheets. This while I was managing a portfolio worth $800 million at my day job. The irony wasn't lost on me. Every quarter, I'd receive the family financial statements, a courtesy extended to all shareholders. The company was hemorrhaging money from what they called client entertainment and relationship building, code for Derek's gambling debts and Victoria's shopping sprees. Meanwhile, my division at work had just closed the largest municipal bond deal in the state's history. But I kept showing up, kept smiling, kept transferring money when Victoria's texts came through demanding urgent family support. After all, I was the dutiful daughter, wasn't I? The one who never fought back, never demanded recognition, never questioned why my trust fund had been redirected to Derek's business ventures that never materialized. What they didn't know was that I'd been keeping records of everything. The receipts told a story my family would never admit. Over 15 years, I'd personally funded $17 million of their lifestyle, not from dividends or trust funds, from my own earnings, wired from my personal accounts. It started small. Victoria's first request came 6 months after she married my father. Rebecca, darling, the Hamptons house needs urgent repairs. Could you handle it? Your father's having cash flow issues this quarter. $400,000. I paid it without question. Then came the yacht. The Davidson name needs to maintain certain standards, my father had said, not looking up from his Wall Street Journal. Since you insist on working instead of representing the family properly, the least you can do is contribute. $1.2 million, the private jet lease, the Aspen Ski Lodge, Derek's failed restaurant venture, Victoria's charity galas where she'd introduce me as Robert's daughter who works in some financial firm while wearing jewelry I'd paid for. Each transfer meticulously documented in my files. Bank statements, wire confirmations, even their email requests. My personal favorite was Victoria's message from last year. Need $500K immediately for the yacht club membership renewal. Don't embarrass your father with delays. This was the same week she told a roomful of her friends that I was still living off the family name. The most painful part? They thought I was stupid. They genuinely believed I didn't know they were telling people the money came from Davidson Holdings dividends and their investment returns. Victoria once even commiserated with me about how hard it must be living on a salary while carrying a handbag that cost more than most people's cars, one I'd bought her for Christmas. Every receipt, Every email, every wire transfer. Saved, cataloged, waiting. The retirement party invitation arrived via Victoria's assistant, not even personally sent. The Davidson family cordially invites you to celebrate Robert Davidson's legacy. I wasn't listed as family, just another name on the guest list. The Ritz-Carlton ballroom glittered with 500 of Manhattan's elite that Saturday evening. Investment bankers, real estate moguls, senators, judges. My father's carefully cultivated network assembled to witness his transition from CEO to chairman emeritus. The plan, announced in his speech, was to hand operational control to Derek while maintaining his board position. I arrived 20 minutes after the cocktail hour started, wearing a simple black dress. No jewelry, no fanfare. I wanted to pay my respects and leave quietly. But as I moved through the crowd, the whispers followed. There's the frigid daughter. Can't even hold a conversation at parties. I heard she's jealous of Derek's promotion. Robert deserves better after everything he's done for her. The last comment came from Judge Harrison's wife, loud enough for the entire cluster of guests to hear. They didn't know I was standing right behind them. I continued toward the main table where my father held court, surrounded by board members and major shareholders. Derek stood beside him, already playing the part of heir apparent in his custom Armani suit. Victoria sparkled in diamonds, playing the gracious hostess. That's when our eyes met. Victoria's expression shifted from practiced charm to cold calculation. She whispered something to the security chief, a man I recognized from the company headquarters. He nodded and started moving through the crowd toward me. My father glanced over, saw me, and deliberately turned his back. Victoria's voice carried across the suddenly quiet section of the ballroom. "Security, please remove this uninvited guest. She's making our family uncomfortable." The security chief, a man named Thomas who'd known me since I was 12, looked deeply uncomfortable as he approached. "Miss Davidson, I'm sorry, but I need to ask you to leave." If I walked away now, nothing would change. Derek would become CEO within 6 months. The board, packed with my father's golf buddies, would rubber stamp every decision. My 31% stake, carefully accumulated through 6 shell companies over 5 years, would remain hidden, useless, and the narrative would be cemented. Rebecca Davidson, the failure who couldn't even attend her father's retirement party. But there was more at stake than my pride. Davidson Holdings managed pension funds for 3 unions, held mortgages for 12,000 families, and employed 800 people directly. Under Derek's leadership, with his track record of burning through money and Victoria's appetite for expenses, the company would be stripped for parts within 2 years. I thought about the emails I'd been getting from mid-level managers, worried about Derek's restructuring plans that seemed to involve firing anyone who questioned him, about the controller who'd quietly mentioned irregularities in Derek's expense reports, about the 3 sexual harassment complaints against him that Victoria had made disappear. "Ms. Davidson?" Thomas prompted gently. The crowd was watching now. Someone had their phone out, recording. Good. I'd need the evidence for what came next. "Of course, Thomas," I said clearly, my voice carrying across the silent ballroom. I wouldn't want to make anyone uncomfortable with my presence. I turned to leave, then paused, looking directly at my father. "Enjoy your last party as CEO, Dad." The gasps followed me out, but I didn't look back. In the elevator, I pulled out my phone and opened my contacts. It was time to make 3 calls that would change everything. 5 years ago, I'd made a decision that changed my life. Instead of waiting for recognition that would never come, I'd partnered with James Crawford, a brilliant strategist who'd been pushed out of Goldman Sachs for refusing to enable insider trading. Together, we founded Apex Capital Management. While my family thought I was grinding away at some minor financial firm, I was building an empire. Apex now managed $4.2 billion in assets, with a client list that included 3 sovereign wealth funds and 42 institutional investors. I wasn't just the co-founder, I was the chairman. The shell companies had been James's idea. "Never let them see you coming," he'd said. Through 6 separate entities, I'd quietly accumulated shares of Davidson Holdings whenever they hit the market. Distressed sellers, estate sales, quiet negotiations with disillusioned board members. Over 5 years, I'd assembled 31% ownership of my father's company. But the masterpiece was Clause 7.3.2 in the shareholder agreement. 10 years ago, when my father desperately needed capital for a failed project, he'd agreed to enhanced minority shareholder protections. The clause was clear: any public humiliation, discrimination, or attempt to diminish a shareholder's standing triggered immediate buyback rights at book value, roughly 1/4 of market price. Marcus Sterling, senior partner at Sterling and Associates, and one of the few lawyers my father actually feared, had reviewed everything. "This is ironclad," he told me last month. "But once you trigger it, there's no going back. Your father will fight with everything he has." "He already has," I'd replied, showing him my latest bank statement. Another $500,000 transferred to cover Derek's gambling debts, labeled as family investment. Now, sitting in my home office, I stared at the 3 names on my phone screen. One call would change everything. The security escort was almost gentle, Thomas's hand barely touching my elbow as he guided me through the ballroom. 500 pairs of eyes tracked our path to the exit. The silence was absolute, except for the click of my heels on marble. I passed the table of board members who'd known me since childhood. Not one made eye contact. I walked by my father's banking partners, several of whom I'd actually introduced him to through my own network. They studied their champagne glasses as if they contained the secrets of the universe. At the doorway, Victoria's voice rang out one more time. "This is what happens when family members forget their place." I stopped, turned. The entire room held its breath. "You're absolutely right, Victoria," I said, my voice carrying clearly. I did forget my place. I looked directly at my father, who still wouldn't meet my eyes. "I forgot that my place was never at this table, no matter how much I gave. I forgot that my place was to fund your lifestyle while being called useless. I forgot that my place was to watch Derek destroy everything grandfather built while staying silent." The blood drained from Victoria's face. She knew that tone. It was the same one I'd used when I caught her embezzling from the charity fund 3 years ago, right before I'd covered it up to protect the family name. "But don't worry," I continued, pulling out my phone. "I remember my place now." I walked out as the whispers exploded behind me. In the taxi, my hands were perfectly steady as I made the first call. "Marcus, it's Rebecca. Execute Clause 7.3.2. "Are you certain?" His voice was grave. "They had security escort me out. It's on video. We have our trigger." "Then God help them all." The second call went to James Crawford. It was nearly midnight, but he answered on the first ring. "Rebecca, how was the party?" "Exactly as expected. I need you to call an emergency shareholders meeting for Davidson Holdings." There was a pause. "We're really doing this?" "They had security remove me, James, in front of 500 people. Jesus Christ." "All right, I'll have our lawyers file the notice tonight. As a 31% shareholder, you have the right to call an emergency meeting with 72 hours notice." The third call was to my private banker. "Sandra, I need you to freeze all automatic transfers from my accounts effective immediately." "All of them? Including the family-designated accounts?" "Especially those, and please email me the confirmation immediately." By the time the taxi reached my apartment building, my phone was already exploding. 17 missed calls in 10 minutes. I turned it off and poured myself a glass of wine. At exactly 12:01 a.m., several things happened simultaneously. The automatic transfer for the Hamptons House mortgage failed. Victoria's black card was declined mid-purchase at Bergdorf Goodman's private shopping event. Derek's yacht access was revoked for non-payment. The jet lease company received notice of termination. $17 million worth of lifestyle support simply stopped. My phone, even powered off, somehow managed to light up with incoming calls. I counted them in the morning: 56 calls, 112 text messages, 43 emails. The subject lines ranged from confused, "Is there a banking error?" to desperate, "Urgent, call immediately," to threatening, You will regret this. But the one that made me smile was from the party photographer. Ms. Davidson, I have all the footage from tonight. Would you like copies for your records? Yes, I would. By morning, the family meltdown was complete. Victoria's first text came at 5:47 a.m. The Bergdorf manager called security on me. The card was declined for a $3,000 dress. Derek's was more direct. What the hell did you do? They locked me out of the yacht. My father tried to maintain his CEO composure. Rebecca, there seems to be some confusion with our banking arrangements. Call me immediately to resolve this. Then, as the hours passed and I didn't respond, the tone shifted. Victoria. You vindictive little bitch. You've been planning this, haven't you? Derek. Dad's going to destroy you. You just killed your inheritance. My father. You have no idea what you've started. I'll have you removed as a shareholder by Monday. The most telling message came from their accountant. Ms. Davidson, the family operating account only has $1,200 remaining. Mr. Davidson is requesting immediate restoration of the monthly transfers. $1,200. That wouldn't even cover Victoria's daily spa treatment. I finally turned on my phone properly at noon and called Marcus back. Rebecca, I've been fielding calls all morning. Your father's legal team is in panic mode. Let them panic. Do we have everything we need? The shareholder meeting is set for Tuesday 9 a.m. at Davidson Tower. I've notified all registered shareholders and the financial press. Your father's team is claiming you don't have standing, but... He chuckled. Wait until they find out about Apex. Have they figured it out yet? Not a clue. They're still looking for some mysterious foreign investor. Your shell companies were perfectly structured. Through my apartment window, I could see Central Park, peaceful and green. For the first time in 15 years, I felt the same peace inside. The storm was coming, but I was ready. Have you ever had to hide your success from toxic family members? Drop a comment and let me know. And if you want to see how Clause 7382 helped me turn the tables completely, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the dramatic boardroom showdown coming up. The world needed to understand who they were really dealing with, while my family scrambled to understand why their luxury life had evaporated overnight. I sat in my real office, the one they'd never seen. The 42nd floor of One Manhattan Plaza housed Apex Capital Management. Our reception area alone was worth more than Derek's failed restaurant venture. The walls displayed my actual achievements: the Forbes 40 Under 40 feature, the Wall Street Journal's Innovative Fund Managers Award, the Princeton Economics Review calling me the quiet force reshaping private equity. James walked in with a stack of documents. Your father's team just filed an emergency injunction. They're claiming you're attempting to sabotage the company. With what evidence? They don't have any. They're fishing. But Rebecca, they still don't know about Apex. They think you're acting alone, maybe with some borrowed money. I pulled up our investor portal on the main screen. $4.2 billion under management. 212 portfolio companies. Institutional clients that included the California Teachers Pension Fund and the Norwegian Sovereign Wealth Fund. What about Davidson Holdings' position in our portfolio? James smiled. Hidden in plain sight through 6 shells, Meridian Ventures, Cascade Investments, Paramount Holdings, Zenith Capital, Aurora Partners, and Evergreen Trust. Combined, they own 31% of Davidson Holdings. And the SEC filing? Completely legal. Each entity owns less than 5%, so no individual disclosure required. But combined, you're the largest single shareholder after your father's 33%. I looked at the photo on my desk, not of family but of the 200 young women who'd received Apex scholarships last year. That's where the $17 million should have gone all along. James, make sure Bloomberg and the Journal know about the emergency meeting. You want press there? I want everyone there. The document that would change everything was 10 years old, signed when my father's ego had exceeded his cash flow. He'd over-leveraged on a Miami development that went sideways when the market shifted. He needed $30 million in 48 hours or face bankruptcy. I'd been 28 then, working 18-hour days at Morgan Stanley, when he'd called me for the first time in 6 months. Not to ask how I was, but to demand I liquidate my grandmother's trust to save him. "It's your duty as a Davidson," he'd said. I'd agreed, but with conditions. The shareholder agreement amendment seemed minor at the time, just some additional protections for minority shareholders. My father had barely read it, desperate for the cash infusion. Clause 7.3.2 read, "Any shareholder subjected to public humiliation, discrimination, or deliberate exclusion from company or family events by controlling shareholders may exercise immediate buyback rights at book value for the offending party's shares." The book value was calculated at 1/4 of market value, a devastating discount designed to prevent exactly the kind of behavior my father had just displayed. Marcus had been brilliant in drafting it. "The clause specifically mentions public and family events," he explained over coffee. "The retirement party was both. Having security remove you, on video, with 500 witnesses including major shareholders and media, it's textbook triggering." What about the board challenge? "They need 67% to remove you as a shareholder. Your father has 33%. Even if every other shareholder sides with him, which they won't once they know who you really are, he can't reach the threshold." The beauty was that my father had signed it himself. His signature, bold and arrogant, sat right below mine on the document. "He won't remember this clause exists," I said. Marcus smiled. "That's what makes it perfect." They showed up at my building at 11 p.m. Sunday night. All of them. My father, Victoria, Derek, even some cousins who'd been enjoying the family largesse. The doorman called up, his voice nervous. "Miss Davidson, your family is here. They're insistent. Tell them I'll come down to the lobby, and please have security ready." I took the elevator down with Marcus and 2 associates from his firm. The lobby was marble and glass, every sound echoing. My family stood clustered near the entrance, my father's face purple with rage. "You ungrateful bitch!" he started before seeing the lawyers. Then, more controlled. "Rebecca, we need to discuss this privately." "Anything you need to say can be said here, Robert." I used his first name deliberately. "Or at the shareholders' meeting Tuesday." Victoria stepped forward, designer heels clicking. "You're destroying your own family. What would your mother think?" "My mother died when I was 8. You married my father when I was 9. Don't you dare invoke her name." Derek, swaying slightly, drunk or high, probably both, laughed bitterly. "You think you're so smart. Dad's going to bury you in court for years." "Mr. Davidson," Marcus interjected smoothly, "any legal action should be directed through proper channels, and I should mention that security footage from tonight is being preserved for potential harassment charges." My father's voice dropped to a growl. "I made you. Everything you have came from me." "Actually," I said calmly, "everything you have came from me. $17 million worth. All documented. All ending now." The lobby security cameras captured everything. My father lunging forward, stopped by his own lawyer. Victoria shrieking about lawsuits. Derek calling me names I won't repeat. "Tuesday, 9 a.m. Don't be late," I said, walking back to the elevator. My father's threat wasn't empty. By Monday morning, his legal team had filed 3 separate motions. One to block the shareholder meeting, one to freeze my assets claiming fiduciary breach, and one to remove me as a shareholder for conduct detrimental to company interests. The problem for him? Everything was leaking to the press. Davidson family feud erupts over control of 2.3B Empire. Wall Street Journal. Mystery shareholder challenges Davidson CEO. Bloomberg. Video shows CEO's daughter ejected from retirement gala. Business Insider. The video from the party had gone viral on financial Twitter. That Davidson drama was trending. The stock had dropped 8% in pre-market trading. My phone rang. It was Harrison Mitchell, the lead independent board member. Rebecca, what the hell is happening? Robert says you're trying to stage a hostile takeover. Harrison, I'm the largest shareholder after my father. I'm calling a meeting as is my right. Everything else is just noise. Largest shareholder? You own maybe 2% through that trust. I own 31% through various entities. You'll see the documentation Tuesday. The silence lasted so long I thought he'd hung up. Then, Jesus Christ, Rebecca, he has no idea, does he? No. The board. We've been concerned about Derek's succession plan. If what you're saying is true, it's true. And Harrison, you might want to review Clause 7.3.2 in the shareholder agreement, particularly in light of Saturday's events. Another long pause. I'll see you Tuesday. By market close, Davidson Holdings had lost $200 million in market cap. 3 institutional investors had called emergency meetings, and my father had left 17 voicemails, each more desperate than the last. The empire he'd built on my money and my mother's name was cracking. And we hadn't even gotten to the main event yet. By Monday evening, the entire financial world was watching. CNBC ran a special segment, The Davidson Dynasty in Crisis. The video from the Ritz-Carlton had been viewed over 3 million times. Someone had leaked that the family's lavish lifestyle had mysteriously halted over the weekend. But the real bombshell came from an unexpected source. Patricia Chen, now Patricia Smith after her marriage, the company's former CFO who'd been pushed out 5 years ago for disagreeing with strategic direction, went on Bloomberg. I'm not surprised, she said calmly. Rebecca Davidson was the only one in that family who understood numbers. While Derek was burning through investor money on vanity projects, she was asking the real questions. They silenced her every time. The interviewer leaned forward. You're saying Rebecca had concerns about company management? I'm saying she was the only one who cared about fiduciary responsibility. There's a reason she was never given a board seat despite being a shareholder and having more financial experience than half the board combined. My phone buzzed. James. Your father's team just called. They want to negotiate. No. They're offering you a board seat and a public apology. No. Rebecca, they're desperate. I think they finally pulled the corporate records. They know about Apex. I looked out at the city lights. Somewhere out there, my father was probably in his study, finally reading the shareholder agreement he'd signed a decade ago, finally understanding that his useless daughter had been playing a longer game than he'd ever imagined. Tell them I'll see them at the meeting. And James, make sure the Wall Street Journal knows that Apex Capital will be represented in full force tomorrow. With pleasure. Tomorrow, the girl they'd thrown out would walk back in owning nearly a third of their empire. Wow, thank you so much for staying with this story. The boardroom showdown is about to unfold, where every secret gets exposed. If you've ever had to fight for respect from your own family, please like this video, subscribe to support everyone who's had the courage to stand up for their worth. Tuesday morning arrived gray and drizzling. Davidson Tower pierced the clouds, 67 floors of glass and steel that represented everything my grandfather had built and my father had leveraged. The boardroom on the 67th floor was already filling when I arrived at 8:45 a.m. 200 shareholders, 30 financial reporters, and a live CNBC feed that my father's team had tried desperately to block. I entered with my team, Marcus Sterling, James Crawford, and 3 associates from Sterling and Associates. We moved as a unit, purposeful and calm. The whispers started immediately. Is that Rebecca Davidson? I thought she was just a mid-level analyst somewhere. Who are those lawyers with her? My father sat at the head of the massive conference table, Victoria beside him in a white suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. Derek lounged in his chair, trying to project confidence but sweating through his Armani. The independent board members were all present: Harrison Mitchell, Sandra Reeves, Thomas Ashford, and Margaret Liu. They watched me with a mixture of curiosity and concern. I took a seat directly across from my father. Our eyes met for the first time since Saturday night. He looked older, grayer, as if he'd aged years in 3 days. "Before we begin," he said, voice steady but strained, "I want to remind everyone that this meeting was called without proper cause by a minority shareholder attempting to damage company value for personal revenge." Harrison Mitchell cleared his throat. "Robert, let's follow proper procedure. The meeting was called legally. Ms. Davidson has the floor." I stood slowly, my hand steady as I picked up the remote for the presentation screen. "Good morning. I'm Rebecca Davidson, and I represent Apex Capital Management, the largest shareholder of Davidson Holdings after the founding family." The room erupted. My father slammed his hand on the table. "This is impossible. You don't have the resources." "Robert, please," Harrison Mitchell interrupted. "Let her continue." My father's face was crimson. "This ungrateful daughter has sabotaged our family's legacy. She's been plotting against us while pretending to be loyal. I move to remove her as a shareholder under Article 12, Section 4, conduct detrimental to company interests." Several older board members nodded. One shareholder called out, "She cost us 8% yesterday alone." Victoria stood, playing to the crowd. "This is what happens when children forget everything their parents sacrificed for them. We gave Rebecca everything: education, connections, opportunities, and this is how she repays us." "Actually," I said, clicking to the first slide, "let's talk about who gave whom everything." The screen filled with a graph showing financial flows over 15 years. $17 million transferred from my personal accounts to various Davidson family entities. Derek laughed nervously. "That's ridiculous. You don't have that kind of money." "From 2010 to 2025, I continued, "I personally funded the Hamptons estate mortgage, the yacht, the jet lease, Derek's failed ventures, Victoria's charity galas, and approximately 300 other expenses." "Lies," Victoria spat. "The money came from company dividends." "Then you won't mind if I show the receipts?" The screen changed. Email after email, wire transfer confirmations, bank statements, Victoria's own messages demanding money, my father's texts about urgent family needs. The room had gone completely silent. "But that's not why we're here," I said. "We're here because on Saturday night, at the Ritz-Carlton, security was ordered to physically remove me from a family event. On video. In front of 500 witnesses." I clicked again. The video played on the massive screen. Victoria's voice echoed through the boardroom. "Security, remove this uninvited guest." "Let me formally introduce myself," I said, voice carrying clearly through the silent boardroom. "I am Rebecca Davidson, co-founder and chairman of Apex Capital Management." The presentation slide changed, showing Apex's logo and statistics. Gasps rippled through the room. "Apex manages $4.2 billion in assets. We have 212 portfolio companies. Our investors include 3 sovereign wealth funds and 42 institutional investors." My father's lawyer stood up. "This is irrelevant to—" "Through 6 legally structured entities," I continued, "Apex controls 31% of Davidson Holdings. Combined with my personal 2% stake, I am the largest single shareholder block after the founding family's 33%. The screen showed the ownership structure. Meridian Ventures, Cascade Investments, Paramount Holdings, Zenith Capital, Aurora Partners, and Evergreen Trust, each owning between 4.8% and 5.2%, carefully under the disclosure threshold. Harrison Mitchell leaned forward. When did this happen?" "Over the past 5 years. Every purchase was legal, filed properly with the SEC, and executed at market price." Derek stood up, pointing at me. "This is corporate espionage. She's been spying on us." "I've been investing in my family's company," I corrected, "while being systematically excluded from any meaningful participation despite my qualifications and shareholding." Margaret Liu, one of the independent directors, spoke up. Ms. Davidson, your credentials are impressive, but this seems like an elaborate revenge plot. No, Ms. Liu, this is about fiduciary responsibility. I click to the next slide. Let's discuss Davidson Holdings' financial performance under current management. The numbers were damning. Overhead expenses up 300%. Client entertainment consuming millions. Derek's division losing money for 7 straight quarters. But the truly concerning part, I said, is what triggered today's meeting. The room held its breath. Marcus, I said, would you please explain Clause 7.3.2? Marcus Sterling stood, his presence commanding immediate attention. Every major shareholder knew his reputation. He'd never lost a corporate governance case. 10 years ago, when Davidson Holdings required emergency capital, an amendment was added to the shareholder agreement. Clause 7.3.2 states, any shareholder subjected to public humiliation, discrimination, or deliberate exclusion from company or family events by controlling shareholders may exercise immediate buyback rights at book value. He clicked his own remote. The clause appeared on screen, highlighted in yellow, with my father's signature bold at the bottom. The triggering event is documented on video. Ms. Rebecca Davidson, a registered shareholder, was publicly humiliated and physically removed from a family event by security at the direct order of controlling shareholders. My father's lawyer jumped up. That clause was meant for hostile takeovers, not family disputes. The language is clear and unambiguous, Marcus replied. It makes no distinction between family and non-family shareholders. In fact, it specifically mentions family events. What's book value? A shareholder called out. James Crawford stood. Current book value is $45 per share. Market price closed yesterday at $178. The math was brutal. If I exercised the clause, I could force my father to sell his shares at a 75% discount. This is extortion, Victoria shrieked. This is contract law, Marcus said calmly. Mr. Davidson signed this agreement. He's bound by it. Harrison Mitchell was reading the clause on his tablet. Robert, did you know about this provision? My father's silence was answer enough. Furthermore, Marcus continued, the video evidence shows clear discrimination. Multiple witnesses heard Mrs. Davidson refer to Rebecca as useless and state she was making the family uncomfortable. Every document has been authenticated, Marcus concluded. The clause is now active. I hereby exercise my rights under Clause 7.3.2, I announced. I'm offering to purchase all shares held by Robert and Victoria Davidson at book value. The room exploded. Reporters were typing furiously. Several shareholders were on their phones with their own lawyers. My father looked like he'd been punched in the stomach. You can't do this, he whispered. The math is simple, James explained to the room. At book value, the Davidson family's 33% stake is worth approximately $340 million. At market value, it's worth $1.3 billion. The difference is nearly $1 billion in lost value. However, I continued, I'm willing to offer an alternative. The room quieted. Option 1. You sell to me at book value as the contract requires. Option 2. You retain 15% of your shares, but immediately resign from all executive and board positions. Derek is permanently barred from any role in the company. Victoria's consulting contracts are terminated. My father's lawyer whispered urgently in his ear. Victoria was sheet white, gripping the table. You have 5 minutes to decide, I said. Harrison Mitchell spoke up. As lead independent director, I should note that several institutional shareholders have already expressed concern about succession planning. This situation, regardless of outcome, requires serious governance review. Thomas Ashford, another board member, added, I move for an immediate vote of no confidence in current leadership. Seconded, said Margaret Liu. My father stood, shaking. This is my company. My father built this with my mother's money, I interrupted. The seed capital came from her family trust, the same trust you've been pillaging for 30 years. 4 minutes and 30 seconds later, my father's lawyer spoke. My clients will accept option 2. The empire had fallen. Not with violence or rage, but with contracts and clauses. "We need to vote," Harrison Mitchell announced. "All in favor of accepting the immediate resignation of Robert Davidson as chairman and CEO?" Hands rose throughout the room. I counted 67%, exactly the threshold needed. My 33% plus the independent directors, plus several institutional investors who'd been waiting for this moment. Motion carried. Robert Davidson, you are hereby removed from all positions at Davidson Holdings, effective immediately. My father sank into his chair. 3 decades of power gone in seconds. I also moved to remove Victoria Davidson from her role as CFO and terminate all consulting agreements, Sandra Reeves added. Another vote, another landslide. "And Derek Davidson is barred from any employment or board position with the company," Margaret Liu stated. Derek laughed bitterly. "You think you've won? You've destroyed our family." "No," I said quietly. "You destroyed our family when you decided I was worthless despite evidence to the contrary. When you took my money while calling me useless. When you had security escort me out like a criminal." Harrison cleared his throat. "Ms. Davidson, the board would like to offer you the position of CEO." The offer hung in the air. This was what I'd supposedly wanted, wasn't it? To take over, to prove myself, to show them all? "No," I said. The room stirred in surprise. "I nominate Jonathan Hartley from our Singapore office. He's brilliant, ethical, and has no connection to this family drama. I'll remain a major shareholder and serve as chairman of the board, but I have my own company to run." It was the ultimate power move, showing I didn't need their validation anymore. "Furthermore," I continued, "the $17 million in family support will be redirected to the Rebecca Davidson Foundation for Women in Finance, effective immediately." The meeting concluded at 10:47 a.m. My father left without a word, Victoria trailing behind him, her heels clicking a retreat. Derek had to be escorted out after he kicked a chair, but I wasn't finished. "One more thing," I announced as people started to leave. "All senior executives will undergo a forensic audit. Any irregularities in expense reports or company fund usage will be investigated fully." Several executives suddenly looked uncomfortable. They knew what that meant. Derek's gambling debts charged as client entertainment, Victoria's shopping sprees labeled as marketing expenses, the phantom consulting fees to her friends. Outside the boardroom, the media was waiting. I gave a brief statement. "Davidson Holdings has tremendous potential that's been constrained by nepotism and mismanagement. Today, we've taken the first step toward transparent, ethical governance. The company my grandfather built deserves leadership that puts stakeholders first, not family politics." "Ms. Davidson," a reporter called out, "your father said you destroyed the family. Any response?" "My father destroyed our family when he chose favoritism over fairness, when he valued appearance over accomplishment. I simply stopped enabling it." As I walked to the elevator, employees lined the hallways. Some applauded, others just stared. The controller who'd warned me about Derek's expenses mouthed, "Thank you." In the elevator, James turned to me. "You could have taken everything. Why leave them 15%? "Because I'm not them," I replied. "I don't need to destroy people to prove my worth. I just needed them to stop destroying me." My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "This is Patricia Smith, formerly Chen, watching the news. About time someone stood up to them. Proud of you. Sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's simply refusing to play by their rules anymore." The media explosion was immediate and overwhelming. Wall Street Journal. Daughter dethrones dynasty in dramatic boardroom coup. Forbes. The 38-year-old billionaire who took down her own father. Bloomberg. Rebecca Davidson. The quiet force who reshook real estate. CNBC. Davidson Holdings soars 15% after leadership shakeup. The video of the boardroom confrontation, leaked by someone, I suspected Harrison Mitchell, went viral. Hashtag corporate justice trended globally. My LinkedIn received 40,000 new followers in 3 hours. The interview requests were endless. 60 Minutes, Bloomberg, Fortune, even Oprah's team reached out. I declined them all except for one, a written piece for Harvard Business Review about governance and family businesses. But the most interesting reactions came from the business community. 53 companies reached out about board positions. Apex Capital received $800 million in new investment commitments within a week. Our inbox flooded with pitches from female founders who said my story inspired them to seek funding. The controller from Davidson Holdings, Jennifer Martinez, sent me an email. The forensic audit found $47 million in questionable expenses over 5 years. Derek alone accounted for $12 million. The new CEO is pressing charges. 3 other family companies reached out privately, asking for advice on dealing with similar situations. Apparently, toxic family businesses were more common than anyone admitted publicly. The Singapore office's Jonathan Hartley accepted the CEO position and immediately implemented new governance policies. The stock hit an all-time high of $207 per share. My $15 million foundation had already received an additional $5 million in donations from other women in finance who wanted to support the next generation. But the number that mattered most? 0. That's how many times my family contacted me directly after the meeting. They finally understood that boundaries weren't suggestions anymore. 2 weeks after the meeting, the attempts at reconciliation began. First came my father's email, 3 pages of self-pity disguised as apology. Rebecca, I've had time to reflect on my actions. I realize now that I always knew you were funding our lifestyle. I was too proud to acknowledge it. Your mother would be disappointed in how I treated you. Can we meet to discuss rebuilding our relationship? I forwarded it to Marcus with 2 words. No response. Victoria tried a different approach, sending messages through mutual acquaintances. She's willing to apologize publicly, one society friend told me at a charity event. She says she was threatened by your intelligence and acted out of insecurity. Tell her to save it for her therapist, I replied. Derek showed up at Apex Capital's building, drunk at 2 p.m. on a Wednesday. Security called me directly. Ms. Davidson, your brother is in the lobby. He's agitated. He's not my brother. He's my former stepbrother. And if he doesn't leave immediately, call the police. Through the security footage, I watched him being escorted out, screaming about family loyalty. The irony wasn't lost on me. He wanted loyalty after showing none. The most pathetic attempt came from a lawyer representing them collectively. The Davidson family is prepared to offer a public apology and acknowledge your contributions if you'll restore some financial support. They're struggling to maintain basic necessities. Basic necessities. Victoria's definition included a full-time driver and weekly Botox. Tell them, I said slowly, that I'll provide exactly the same support they offered me when I was building my career. None. Some bridges, once burned, should stay ash, not out of cruelty, but out of wisdom. They'd shown me who they were for 15 years. I finally believed them. The ripple effects continued for months. Derek was arrested for embezzlement after the forensic audit revealed he'd been selling company information to competitors. The trial would start in January. Victoria's charity was investigated for fraud. Turns out 90% of donations went to administrative costs, namely, her lifestyle. She was banned from every major charity board in Manhattan. My father, stripped of his positions and social standing, sold the Hamptons house and moved to a modest apartment in Connecticut. The New York society that had once courted him now treated him like a pariah. The man who'd valued appearances above all had lost the only thing he cared about, his image. But the positive impacts were even greater. Davidson Holdings implemented new policies protecting minority shareholders and requiring transparent financial reporting. Employee satisfaction scores hit record highs. The company won Most Improved Governance from the Corporate Ethics Institute. The Rebecca Davidson Foundation funded 230 women in its first year. 12 of them started their own investment firms. One of them, Maria Santos, a first-generation college graduate, just closed her first $100 million fund. Apex Capital became the go-to firm for founders who'd been overlooked by traditional VCs. We funded 47 women-led companies and 28 minority-led startups. Our returns beat every major fund in our class. I received a letter from my grandmother's estate lawyer, something she'd written before she died, but asked to be delivered when Rebecca finds her strength. It simply said, "Your mother would be proud. Never apologize for knowing your worth." At the 1-year anniversary of the boardroom coup, someone asked me if I regretted anything. Yes, I said. I regret waiting so long to choose myself. The reporter seemed surprised. That's it? That's everything. 1 year later, I established the boundaries that should have existed all along. Communication with family was limited to quarterly emails through lawyers, strictly about remaining shared business interests. No personal meetings, no phone calls, no emergency requests. I didn't attend family events. Not the weddings of distant cousins who suddenly remembered I existed. Not the funeral of my father's brother who'd watched me be humiliated for years in silence. My absence spoke louder than any words could. The therapy helped more than I'd expected. Dr. Sarah Winters specialized in family trauma and financial abuse. "You were the family ATM," she said during our third session. "They programmed you to believe your only value was what you could provide." "But I let them," I said. "You were a child when it started. Children don't let abuse happen. It happens to them." We worked through the guilt, the anger, the grief of losing a family I'd never really had. I learned that boundaries weren't walls. They were gates that I controlled. The hardest part was accepting that they'd never really change. My father sent monthly letters, each one a masterclass in manipulation. Victoria posted cryptic social media messages about family forgiveness. Derek gave an interview to a tabloid claiming I'd stolen his inheritance. I responded to none of it. Instead, I built my chosen family. James Crawford became the brother I'd actually wanted. Marcus Sterling and his wife invited me to holidays. The women from the foundation formed a network of support that felt more like family than blood ever had. My new rule was simple. Anyone who wanted to be in my life had to respect my worth from the start. No proving necessary, no payment required, just mutual respect. It really was that simple. The lessons I learned could fill a book, and eventually did. Worth, A Guide to Recognizing Your Value, hit #1 on the New York Times business bestseller list. The core message was simple but revolutionary for those of us raised to be givers. Your worth isn't determined by those who refuse to see it. I learned that respect can't be purchased. $17 million hadn't bought me a seat at their table. But the moment I stood up and walked away, I realized I'd been sitting at the wrong table all along. I learned that true power isn't about destroying others. It's about knowing when to use your strength and when to walk away. I could have taken everything from them. Instead, I took back myself. I learned that family isn't about blood, it's about behavior. The people who truly loved me never needed me to prove my worth. They saw it from the beginning. I learned that success really is the best response to those who doubted you. Not because it proves them wrong, but because it proves you right about yourself. Most importantly, I learned that choosing yourself isn't selfish, it's necessary. Every time we allow ourselves to be diminished to keep the peace, we're not keeping peace. We're keeping dysfunction alive. During a speaking engagement at Wharton, a young woman asked me, "How do you know when it's time to cut toxic family out?" "When the cost of keeping them in your life is higher than the cost of letting them go," I answered. "And the cost isn't just money, it's your self-respect, your mental health, your future." The audience was silent for a moment. Then the applause started, and it didn't stop for a full minute. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply refuse to play by rules you didn't write. Today, 3 years after that night at the Ritz-Carlton, my life is unrecognizable in the best way. Apex Capital manages $12 billion across 4 continents. We're the largest female-led investment firm in North America. Our returns consistently beat the market, proving that investing in overlooked founders isn't charity, it's smart business. The foundation has funded over 1,000 women, creating a network of leaders who support each other. Maria Santos, our first recipient, just hired our 100th recipient. The cycle of empowerment continues. Davidson Holdings thrives under ethical leadership. The stock trades at $340, nearly double what it was under my father. Employees own 15% through a program I insisted on. The company my grandfather built finally serves all its stakeholders, not just the family. I sleep peacefully in my penthouse apartment, no longer jumping when my phone rings at night. No more emergency transfers, no more emotional manipulation, no more being told I'm not enough. My father still sends letters, I don't read them anymore. They go straight to a file Marcus maintains in case legal action is ever needed. Victoria remarried. Some hedge fund manager who doesn't know her history. Derek works as a junior sales associate at a car dealership in New Jersey. Sometimes people ask if I forgive them. The truth is, forgiveness isn't the point. I've moved so far beyond them that forgiveness feels irrelevant. You don't forgive the storm that knocked down your house. You just build a better one. My life is full of people who saw my worth before I had to prove it. That's the family I choose every day. And every morning, when I look in the mirror, I see someone who finally chose herself, and that has made all the difference. Thank you for listening to my story. If you're struggling with toxic family members, remember, you deserve respect without conditions. Setting boundaries isn't cruel, it's self-preservation. Like this video if it resonated with you, subscribe for more stories about people who dared to choose themselves. Comment below. Where are you watching from and what part of this story spoke to you most? Your worth isn't negotiable, remember that.